latest weather, traffic, and news updates online at 560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. The challenges keep coming at President Trump. The world he inherited, exacerbated by the previous administration, to be sure. Now we have a back and forth that has started with Iran. Trump, in his interview over the weekend with Maria Bartiromo, had this message to the mullahs in Tehran that he memorialized in the form of a letter.
I hope that Iran, and I've written him a letter saying, I hope you're going to negotiate, because if we have to go in militarily, it's going to be a terrible thing for them.
You wrote a letter to the Khomeini?
Yes.
When did you send the letter?
Yesterday.
And you said you better negotiate, or we want you to negotiate?
I didn't say you better. I
Okay.
said, I hope you're going to negotiate, because it's going to be a lot better for Iran. And I think they want to get that letter. The other alternative is we have to do something, because you can't let them have a nuclear weapon.
Have to do something. Of course, the Ayatollah immediately rejected that letter out of hand, as you would expect. But the overture was interesting. The statement that at some point you have to do something is interesting. Sort of a related story, because Soleimani is the example that was used as a preface for the comments from Trump's U.S. hostage envoy, a gentleman named Adam Boehler, because Trump issued another missive in the direction of Hamas through social media, basically saying, release the hostages or die. And, of course, that's treated with more or less sobriety, depending on your political persuasion. But Adam Boehler had this to say about Trump's message to Hamas.
It may seem like he makes empty threats until he carries out the threat. And then it's not so empty, and then you're dead.
Yeah, well, that's the progression. That is the progression. KT McFarland is a former First Deputy National Security Advisor to President Trump, author of Revolution, Trump, Washington, and We the People. KT, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
It's a great pleasure to be with you, both of you, Dan and Amy. Thank you.
Yeah, that's high level diplomacy there. So first I make a threat, and then you don't believe me, and then you're dead. It's linear like that?
Yeah, I mean, in effect, always pay attention to what President Trump does, not what he says as much. And sometimes what you should do is look at what he says. Take what he says seriously. Always take it seriously. But you don't necessarily take it literally. So when President Trump Iran is in his crosshairs now, and he's going to do to Iran what he did to Iran last time around, but he'll do it more quickly and more effectively, which is to bankrupt Iran. Because he'll reinforce the sanctions, which Biden had stopped enforcing. So Biden let Iran sell oil all around the world. And then number two, because of Biden's energy policies, the price of oil was very high. So Iran had a windfall profit, 150 billion. And what did they use that for? They gave it to their proxies to destroy Israel and attack Israel on October 7th. So what President Trump is going to do is take away the windfall. And then what happens to Iran is what's always happened to Iran every 8 or 9 years, that the people of Iran are getting squeezed. It's a very well-educated, large middle class in Iran, and they're the people who are getting squeezed. And they go to the streets, and they demand regime change. They demand democracy. Now, every time they've done it, whether it's in the Obama or Biden administrations, the Democratic presidents have always sided with the mullahs. Trump is not going to side with the mullahs. If the Iranian people go to the streets and demand a change of getting rid of the mullahs, demand a revolution in Iran, I would think President Trump, at a minimum, is going to go out and give an interview to Maria Bartiromo saying, I support them.
Yeah, I have no doubt. But the idea that Trump is either spoiling for military conflict with Iran, or that he is being pressured from, sort of inside the administration, to move in that direction is erroneous?
I'm sure that he's being pressured by some. I'm sure that in Israel, many are pressuring, let's go take out the nuclear sites once and for all. But if you look at President Trump, the history of how he's behaved as president, or even as a businessman, he uses the economic and trade weapon first. That's in the toolkit. That's the one he grabs for first. Can you do it economically? Can you do it with trade? Can you do it with the trade war? Can you do it with sanctions? Can you do it by helping destroy their economies? It's slower than a military action, but often more effective. He also doesn't believe in a regime change in the sense of the United States is going to go overthrow the leader of a country. He definitely prefers if regime change happens, it happens from within. The people from within do it. I mean, President Trump was very supportive. If you go back and look at his history, when the Iron Curtain came down, when the Berlin Wall came down and all those countries got independence under President Reagan and President George H.W. Bush. But I think that Trump has the toolbox to use a military deterrent, shall we say, or even a military weapon in the sense of attacking Iran. But that's usually not where he goes first. He'll use the others and see what happens, but then always having in reserve that military option.
I just want to get your comment on some comments made by Tucker Carlson because, of course, so many conservatives pay attention to what he says. He recently interviewed Qatar's Prime Minister Al Thani, and he said there's enormous pressure on the United States to participate in a brand new war against Iran. The government of Qatar thinks that's unwise, so of course they're being slandered relentlessly in American media. So the idea that Qatar is being slandered, number one. Number two, he also said this: neocon projects in the Middle East invariably destroy ancient Christian communities from Iraq to Gaza and in many places in between. Can this be an accident? ? You wonder. So, I understand that journalists interview bad people. That's not what bothers me, that he's interviewing the Qatar PM. It's that he is essentially taking Qatar's line of bull jive and repeating it to the West. In addition to the statement there, how is Gaza a neocon project?
Well, that one I can't quite square. I'm not sure unless it's let's go. I don't know. The neocons aren't playing in that sense. In Gaza, I do think the neocons are urging the United States to go go to war with Iran, go attack Iran as the first tool in the toolbox. The neocons who remember the whole origin of them. These are people who used to be Democrats and then became Republicans, and particularly in the George W. Bush administration, advocated for a lot of military engagement, invading countries in the Middle East. And then after that didn't work out very well, a lot of those, quote, neocons are still hovering around the Republican Party, but a number of them have gone back to be Democrats again. And these are the ones that really advocate military action overseas, whether it's that part of the Democrats, it's a war party, basically. I mean, they'll say they're not, but it's the neocons who want to go to war wherever they can go to war, whether it's let's go to war in Ukraine, let's go to war in Afghanistan, Iraq, let's go to war in Libya. While we're at it, let's look at a South American country. Maybe there's one there we can go to war with, and we for sure want to go to war with Taiwan. Now, that is so anti-Trump's instincts. Trump's instincts is he keeps saying, I'm a deal guy. I want to make a deal. You don't get everything you want in a deal, but at least you don't go have endless, needless killing, whether it was Afghanistan, Vietnam, Iraq, or Ukraine.
No, I mean, I get the drop on neocons. I agree with that. But, I mean, the idea that Qatar is some good faith actor here.
No, of course not.
Right. That's the thing I want to help disabuse people of.
Well, so Qatar is this very wealthy country in the Middle East, and it keeps saying, "Well, we're the intermediaries. We can talk to the Americans. We know them. They know us. They understand us. But we also have the ability to talk to Islamic extremists like Hamas, like the various terrorist groups in the Middle East." And I guess they feel that that's their role in the world, is to talk to both sides. But I wouldn't trust them on anything that they say, or I certainly, as an American, whether Republican or Democrat, would not take foreign policy advice from Qatar.
No,
Yeah.
Well, this morning we're learning that Israel cut off electricity to Gaza ahead of the ceasefire talks. Do you think that will be productive?
Israel's trying to do whatever it can to eliminate Hamas as a power center in Gaza. And Hamas is not dead yet. I mean, they've been greatly damaged and weakened, but the embers are still there in the fireplace and could ignite the minute, a new fuel is added to the fire. Another log is put on the fire. And Israel's job is to try to figure out how to stop Hamas. Now, obviously, Israel it's kind of in a two-place position. On one hand, it wants the hostages or the bodies of the hostages returned to Israel, as does President Trump with the American citizens. But in addition to that, they also want to eliminate Hamas. And, Hamas realizes, we've got a few bodies left, we've got a few hostages left. That's going to stop Israel. It's going to stay Israel's hand. They're not going to really come and obliterate Hamas. They're not going to destroy the tunnels. They're not going to reinvade because we've got those hostages. But I think that the cutting off of electricity is a step that Israel is going to take prior to, if it has to, go militarily back in, send the tanks back in. And President Trump, if you look at what he said in the last couple, especially when he met those released hostages, I met a number of them at CPAC. You just can't help but cry when you see these poor people. Their eyes are haunted. They've been through unspeakable torture as hostages. And when you see that, my reaction as President Trump's is let Israel go finish the job.
In Syria, the new despot there is now engaged in the brutalization of the Syrian people, particularly religious minorities, the Christians, the Alawites, the Druzes. And of course, this was something that Trump was ahead of the learning curve as well on back a decade ago when everybody was cheering, not everybody, but like the D.C. press corps and the neocons were cheering that, for Assad's removal, Obama's red line. And then ultimately when Assad had to abdicate at the end of last year, Syria's free, Syria's free. Pay no attention to who comes after Assad. And this was the concern that Trump had more than a decade ago. And people like Josh Rogan at the Washington Post, the Syria's free, the rebels won, the people liberated themselves from tyranny, and so on and so forth. And now we see Muslims forcing other Muslims, in addition to persecuting religious minorities, forcing other Muslims, Sunni, Shia, to crawl on the ground, bark like dogs. I mean, the images coming out of Syria are disgusting. And brutal, too, just in terms of the death now that is being inflicted. And what are we supposed to take away from this development, and what should America's posture be with respect to al-Jawlani and what seems to be a ruling group that is intent on slaughtering as many religious minorities as they can?
This is a lesson that we should have learned in Iraq, and we should have learned in Afghanistan, and we should have learned whether it was in all the countries in North Africa, even in Egypt. What comes after a despot isn't happy democracy like in New Hampshire. It can often be worse. It can often be warring groups of religious fanatics that have an extended civil war. It can often be terrorists make their homes in these uncontrollable, ungoverned spaces and then go attack the world. And yet somehow I guess I would call them the neocon defense lobby. Again, it's the Democrats united with the far left, the far right, get together around the back of the circle. And they are all the ones who are saying, we got to get rid of these despots. These despots are terrible, with no idea what happens next. And what happens next is not free and fair elections. Because, when you look at democracy, how long did it take democracy in the United States? How long did it take democracy in Great Britain? All the countries that have democracy, it doesn't happen overnight. It happens when there's a free and independent press. It happens when there's a free and independent judiciary. It happens when there's a educated middle class. It doesn't happen by the flick of a pen. And any country is the perfect example of how badly things go when you overthrow despots is Afghanistan, where, Al-Qaeda takes the place. So if you go even back into the Reagan administration, that when we start overthrowing countries, deliberately overthrowing them with no plan for what comes next, chances are what comes next is much worse than you've had, as bad as whatever you have is. And Syria is the perfect example. Now, what should our actions be in the Middle East? We put a lot of money in the Middle East. We put a lot of aid money. We put a lot of military assistance in some of the countries in the Middle East. We should get something for that money. Right now, we're not getting very much at all. And so at a minimum, we get, don't you kill Americans, should be the number one thing that we have in any country we give money to. But then the others is you can build on that. If you look at Egypt and you look at Lebanon and you look at Jordan, why are they not taking some of the Palestinians so we can clear out Gaza, rebuild it, and then one by one with vetted Palestinians, safe Palestinians, coming back? None of these countries want the Palestinians, but that should not necessarily be their option if they're accepting billions of American assistance.
Well, the other thing in Syria with respect to the declaration that Shia Muslims must either convert or be slaughtered, these majority Shia countries, maybe it's time for them to intervene on behalf of their fellow believers. Yeah, their neighbor and their fellow believers. Maybe it's like we talk about Europe. Maybe it's time that the Arab League do a little bit more of the heavy lifting.
Well, whether it's Germany doing more heavy lifting with Ukraine or whether it's the Arab League doing more heavy lifting in the Middle East, let the local, these are wealthy countries, whether it's the Saudis, other countries in the Gulf Arab countries in the Middle East, whether it's Germany, et cetera, in Europe. America's not the world sheriff. America should not have to be the country that gives blood and treasure to defend another country or another country's people or religious minorities when those wealthy, sophisticated, advanced countries don't want to do it themselves. It's a plan, I think, that President Trump has been very good at articulating, whether it's been in Europe, whether it's in the Middle East, is, hey, this is your neighborhood. You need to take a leading role, whether it's in opening up your checkbooks to rebuild or whether it's to making a defense a credible military action if you need to take one. But don't always call America. It's America first. It's not you guys first with it. We're not going to be, what is the expression, Dan? We'll hold your coat while you do the fight. Well, yeah, you hold our coat while we do the fighting on your behalf.
Right. Before we let you go, I wanted to get your sort of perspective on the forthcoming meeting this week between the United States and Team Ukraine. Trump's threatening of sanctions on Putin, basically telling him, hey, you both get to the table and let's get something done here. Do you see enough movement, even rhetorically, that there is a prospect for a cessation of hostilities in the near term?
Well, as President Trump said, they don't have any choice. Ukraine does not have any choice, because if the United States were to cut off assistance or sharing of military intelligence, Ukraine doesn't survive. American tax dollars are being used to pay for the civil service, the salaries and retirement plans and health care plans of civil servants in Ukraine, much less the military assistance that we're giving. Without our help, Ukraine just can't survive more than a couple of weeks, a couple of months. Similarly, we have a lot of pressure that we can bring on President Trump. He said very cryptically, and I wasn't quite sure what he was referring to, he said, well, Russia has no choice either. I know why. I'm not going to tell you about it, but Russia has no choice but to go to the negotiating table. And right now, nobody's at a negotiating table. They're independently talking to President Trump, but he wants to get them at a negotiating table. He wants to end the war. Why? First of all, because the war kills people. It's a terrible waste for everybody. Ukraine is losing this war. But because after the war stops, the economic opportunities for Ukraine to build are enormous. I mean, within 5 years of the war being over, even if Ukraine doesn't get all of its land back, Ukraine could be a wealthy, prosperous country, fully integrated economically with the West.
Well, what about those 12,000 North Korean soldiers that have joined Russian forces? I mean, that's got to drive somebody to the bargaining table.
Are they all dead now? I mean, they're cannon fodder, right?
I would think that's a North Korea issue with the Russians. I don't think America belongs in the middle of that one.
Yeah, right. You work it out with Rocket Man. KT McFarland, former First Deputy National Security Advisor President Trump, author of Revolution, Trump, Washington, and We the People. KT, thank you as always.
Thank you both.
Thank you, and she joined us on our Turnkey.pro answer line.
There's only one radio show in Chicago talking about today's biggest stories and telling you what they really mean. That show is this one. Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Signature Bank is Chicago's fastest growing independently owned business bank. It's a bank where relationships still matter. Signature Bank knows your name and your story. I'm Dan Proft, and I know this because Signature Bank is my business bank.
I'm Robert Anderson, president of McLaughlin Body Company in the Quad Cities, and a customer of Signature Bank. When our 100-year-old family-owned manufacturing company was looking for a new bank, we found an excellent partner with Signature Bank. Signature Bank understands the challenges with manufacturing in today's